Welcome to the history section.
Our focus today is on a really pivotal initial phase of European contact with Japan. We're looking at the decade from 1542 up to 1551.
And we're working from a combination of Jesuit records and also contemporary Japanese accounts.
Exactly. We want to analyze how the introduction of foreign technology, specifically firearms, was received, and how that, in turn, influenced the arrival of a new theological system.
And that starting year, 1542, is, well, it's already a hugely important year in Japanese history, completely separate from any outside contact.
It is. The research shows us it's the year that marks the birth of Tokugawa Ieyasu.
Who, of course, was destined to be the one to put the final touches on the centralized government started by his predecessors, Nobunaga and Hideyoshi.
Right, and this consolidation of power was epical. It brings in the Edo period, which is this remarkable era of deliberate peace for the entire country.
A peace that would last for 2.5 centuries.
So it's quite a remarkable coincidence, really, that this domestic political anchor point happens to coincide with what you could call an external destabilizing factor.
The arrival of Europeans.
Precisely. And while 1542 is the date that later missionaries generally accept, there was a lot of confusion initially about the exact timing of this so-called European discovery.
The documentation from that period was a bit chaotic, I'd imagine.
Very fluid and often contradictory. Some of the early records, for instance, give a whole range of dates for first contact, stretching from as early as 1534 all the way to 1545.
So why did 1542 become the accepted date?
It seems to stem mostly from the account given by the historian Antonio Galvão, who kind of formalized that chronology later on. But the variability itself tells us something important about the rapid, sometimes chaotic nature of global exploration during that time.
Now, the actual narrative of the arrival is preserved in an unpublished manuscript, The History of the Church of Japan.
Yes, that's a Jesuit record from the Ajuda Library in Lisbon, and it covers events right up to 1634. It's quite definitive in crediting the Portuguese as the first Europeans to make formal contact.
And it sets the scene, noting that this happened when Martin Alfonso de Sousa was governor of India.
Which is chronologically significant because that's the exact moment that Francis Xavier is also arriving in India. Their paths are, in a sense, about to cross historically.
The actual event itself, the landing, was completely unintentional.
Oh, completely. It's a classic example of a maritime disaster leading to a major historical contact. The specific ship was a junco, a Chinese sailing vessel.
And on board were 3 Portuguese men, Antonio da Mota, Francisco Zemoto, and Antonio Peixoto.
And they were just on a routine, though probably illicit, trading voyage, sailing from Siam, modern Thailand, towards China.
And this routine voyage gets violently interrupted.
Violently is the word. The vessel gets caught in a massive tempest, a storm so powerful it was known locally as a tufao.
A term that comes from the Chinese taifun or the Japanese taifu.
Both meaning great wind, essentially. And this storm just batters the ship for a full 24 hours, driving it completely off course.
Until it's just deposited by chance among the islands of Japan.
And where they landed is crucial. The island of Tanegashima, which is situated south of Kyushu in the Sea of Satsuma.
If the storm hadn't happened, or if they landed somewhere else, the history could have been very different.
It could have been. But what's really fascinating here is that the very first interaction bypasses any kind of deep cultural or theological exchange.
It goes straight to practical technology.
Exactly. Which brings us directly to the introduction of firepower, what became known as the Tanegashima weapon.
The first real act after this accidental landing is one of immediate technological transfer, a masterclass in swift, utility-based cultural exchange.
It really is. The Portuguese demonstrate, and then they actually teach the people of Tanegashima how to manufacture their advanced firearms.
The arquebuses, or espingardas as they called them.
And this knowledge did not stay put on that one small island. The ability to make these firearms just spread with incredible speed throughout Japan.
Which makes perfect sense, given that Japan at the time was in the middle of the Sengoku, the Warring States period.
Any advantage in weaponry was instantly seen as critical for survival. And it's really a testament to the impact of this event that a clear memory of those 3 Portuguese men, their names, the service they provided, is still preserved in the local history of Tanegashima.
And because the island was the first site of manufacturing, the firearms themselves became known across the entire archipelago as Tanegashima.
They took the island's name as their own. It's a powerful symbol of that first contact.
Now, the Japanese historical perspective gives us some incredibly valuable and specific details that really support and even amplify the Jesuit accounts.
Yes, we have the Nanpo Bunshu, which was written during the Quicho period, so between 1596 and 1615. The historian Professor Suboy considered it the most trustworthy contemporary record.
And it offers a very precise timeline dating the arrival to September 23rd, 1543.
Which is slightly later than the 1542 date favored by the Jesuits, but the level of detail is just meticulous. The Nanpo Bunshu specifies that a large ship with about 100 crew arrived at the bay of Nishimura on Tanegashima.
And the crew looked and sounded completely foreign to the islanders?
Right, so communication was the first major hurdle, but they overcame it through writing.
With sticks on the sand, is that right?
Yes, facilitated by a Chinese scholar named Goho, who was on the foreign ship. The village headman, or Ibanojo, communicated with him this way. It's a remarkably primitive, but obviously effective method.
And through this exchange, they learned the foreigners were merchants from Western countries.
The ship was then guided to a safer port, Akaogi, and the crew was actually housed in a local Buddhist temple, which suggests a certain initial tolerance and hospitality.
And the Japanese account even gives us names for the two foreign chiefs.
Francisco and Kirishita da Mota, which is a transcription that aligns very closely with the Portuguese records of Antonio da Mota and Francisco da Moto.
The description they gave of the weapon itself is a fascinating piece of primary evidence.
It really is. It was described as being about 2 or 3 shaku, long a shaku, being about a foot, so a straight, heavy, hollow metal tube.
And the account focuses on the engineering. One end was securely closed, and there was a small hole near that end to ignite what they called the mysterious medicine.
And the effect of this weapon was completely new and, frankly, terrifying to the Japanese observers. The discharge produced a sound like thunder and a flash of light like lightning.
It says bystanders instinctively covered their ears.
The local feudal lord, Tokitaka of Tanegashima, he immediately grasped the strategic importance of this technology. He bought 2 of them, despite the incredibly high price.
And treated them as the most precious treasures in his domain.
And he practiced with them relentlessly until he became highly skilled. This personal adoption by a high-ranking lord really accelerated its acceptance.
But the immediate challenge for Tokitaka was to move from just buying them to making them locally.
To localize the technology, he needed a continuous supply. So he directs his retainer, Sasakawa Koshiro, to learn how to make the mysterious medicine, the gunpowder.
And that was one hurdle. But the local blacksmiths hit a wall trying to replicate the tube itself.
A critical mechanical obstacle. They could not figure out the technique for securely closing the firing end of the barrel, what's known as the breech plug.
Which is such a crucial detail. It shows that technological transfer isn't just about seeing the final product.
It's about the specific underlying engineering knowledge. And the breakthrough came the next year, in 1544, when another group of foreign merchants returned.
And this time, there was a foreign blacksmith among the crew.
Tokitaka seized the opportunity. He sent his retainer, Kimbinojo Kiyosada, specifically to learn the technique for threading and closing the end of the tube.
And this training was successful.
Very. It's a perfect demonstration of the Japanese capacity for rapid assimilation of complex foreign tech. And the result was a dramatic acceleration of local production. Within about a year of Kiyosada mastering that breech plug technique, 60 or 70 muskets were manufactured locally.
They established a domestic arms industry almost overnight.
Literally. And this rapid success with technology stands in such sharp contrast to the reception of the Portuguese spiritual mission just a few years later.
Right. The spread of Portuguese activity wasn't just confined to Tanegashima. History tells us another vessel visited the domain of Bungo on Kyushu's northern coast.
And the commerce there was notably pragmatic. They traded using scales and weights, not language, emphasizing the mutual economic benefit.
But this commercial exchange quickly led to a high-stakes moral and political problem within the ruling Otomo family.
Yes, the Duke of Bungo, the father of Francis Otomo Yoshishige, he saw how rich the cargo was, and he seriously considered just killing the Portuguese merchants and taking everything.
Which was a common impulse in that period of, let's say, fluid maritime law.
It was. But his son, the future daimyo, intervened. He argued that such an act would bring profound dishonor to his father and violate basic principles of respect for strangers.
And his argument won.
It did, preventing an incident that could have really curtailed future European trade. And significantly, this same daimyo Otomo later learned from the Portuguese how to manufacture ordnance artillery.
So his interest in military technology was consistent. The primary interest was clearly in trade and hardware, not in the cultural ideas the merchants brought with them.
Absolutely. This gives us a rigorous, fact-based framework for that initial contact. But so much of the popular understanding has been shaped or maybe distorted by the claims of one particular individual.
Fernão Mendes Pinto.
Exactly. So we really need to take some time to unpack the Pinto narrative and separate the verifiable facts from his fabrications.
Pinto's book Peregrinação was published much later, in 1614, and it makes some very dramatic claims.
The central one being that he was one of the 3 original discoverers on that storm-driven junco. He places himself right at the scene of the first landing.
But the Jesuit historian who wrote that detailed church history we mentioned earlier, he immediately rejected this.
He did. He noted, rather dryly, that Pinto's work seemed to have been written more to amuse than to set forth truths.
Pinto gives these very embellished stories of his so-called adventures in Tanegashima and Bungo.
For instance, he claims he was chosen to visit the hypochondriac Prince of Bungo because he, Pinto, had a more lively humor than his companion. He then says he cured the prince of both his melancholy and his gout.
Earning immense fame and fortune in the process, of course.
Of course, these are great stories, but they lack any corroboration.
And there's the famous anecdote about the Prince of Bungo's young son.
Right, the 17-year-old prince who becomes obsessed with Pinto's matchlock, overloads it with gunpowder, and is severely wounded in the resulting explosion.
And Pinto claims he single-handedly saved the boy, binding his wounds and curing him.
For which he was supposedly rewarded with over 1,500 ducats. It's a very heroic, self-serving account of his own importance.
But the evidence from independent sources directly contradicts Pinto's role here.
Overwhelmingly. The Jesuit priest is explicit. Pinto was not one of the 3 original crew members. And beyond that, his descriptions of the Japanese political landscape at the time are just demonstrably wrong.
His political inaccuracies are quite glaring. He claims, for example, that the ruler of Tanegashima was a feudatory of the king of Bungo, Atomo.
Which is just factually incorrect. Historical records are very clear that Tanegashima had long been subject to the powerful Shimadzu clan of Satsuma, not the Atomo of Bungo.
He also assigns these ridiculously inflated titles to the ruler of Bungo in 1542.
He does. He claims the ruler was king of Bungo, Hakata Tosa, the Kwantu region, the Goto Islands, a political map that simply didn't exist then. In 1542, the Atomo controlled just the single province of Bungo.
His descriptions are anachronistic, projecting future power back onto the past.
Precisely. And his claim that hundreds of Chinese trading vessels rushed to Japan right after the European discovery is absurd.
Because regular trade between China and Japan had existed for decades.
Of course. The Chinese were very well acquainted with Japan long before Pinto. The Portuguese just opened a new route, and we have to remember the book was published 72 years after the event.
Which limits its accountability.
Though it is important to note he was later confirmed to be with Francis Xavier at the court of Bungo in 1551, so he was in Japan during this era, but his claims about the initial discovery have to be dismissed.
So, having established the real chronology and the immediate focus on military tech, we can now shift to the catalyst for the Christian mission itself.
Which begins a few years later and is spearheaded by Francis Xavier. But his path to Japan was paved by a Japanese man named Anjiro.
A learner from Satsuma.
Anjiro, or Yajiro, was an absolutely crucial figure. He was a man from Satsuma, about 35 years old, who had committed some kind of serious crime and was seeking refuge in a Buddhist monastery.
And he meets a Portuguese merchant there, Alvarez Vaz.
Right, and Vaz, being a man of faith, directs Anjiro to seek out Francis Xavier in Malacca to confess his sins and get spiritual guidance.
Anjiro's journey to meet Xavier shows incredible determination. His first attempt fails when a tempest drives his ship back to China.
Another too foul, perhaps. But he tries again, eventually meets Xavier, and his purpose is clearly sincere. He's driven by remorse and a fear for his soul.
And Xavier immediately sees his potential.
Not just as a convert, but as a vital asset, an interpreter. Anjiro's intellectual capacity was obvious, so Xavier dispatches him to the College of St. Paul in Goa.
The administrative hub of the Portuguese East Indies.
And in Goa, under the care of Cosme de Torres, Anjiro just excels. He learns to read and write Portuguese in only 6 months.
And his memory was incredible. It said he memorized the entire Gospel of Matthew after hearing the commentary on it just twice.
So his baptism on Pentecost Day in 1548 really positions him as the foundational link upon which Xavier would build his entire Japanese mission.
Now, Xavier's own motivation for going to Japan was complex. It was a mix of religious zeal and a profound disillusionment with his work in India.
It was. From his own letters to Ignatius Loyola, It's clear he saw the Japan enterprise as an escape from what he called the discouraging condition and maladministration of the Indies.
He had a strikingly low opinion of the Indian populations he'd worked with.
He did. He called them barbarous, vicious, and without inclination to virtue. So the reports he was getting from merchants and Anjiro about the Japanese, that they were a people of great sense, cultured, curious, governed by reason, that acted as a powerful draw.
It offered the promise of a more intellectually satisfying field for his work.
A sharp contrast to the challenges he felt he was facing in India.
The voyage itself was quite unconventional.
Very. They sailed on a Chinese junk owned by a corsair named Nisida, a pirate, essentially. But his reputation was such that the governor of Malacca made him leave his wife behind as a hostage to ensure the passengers' safe delivery.
And the mission party was quite large. Xavier, Father Torres, Juan Fernandez, Anjiro, and others.
They landed at Kagoshima, which was Anjiro's home province, on August 15, 1549.
And upon landing, the focus of the Japanese court immediately snapped back to politics and commerce. The religious purpose was secondary.
Anjiro went to the court of the Prince of Satsuma, the Shimadzu clan leader, and he was questioned exhaustively, not about Christianity, but about his travels, Portuguese military power in India, foreign affairs in general.
This intense curiosity about the outside world was a consistent trait of the Japanese ruling class.
Desperate for any information that could give them an edge in their internal wars.
Xavier eventually gets his audience and receives permission to preach.
Yes, on September 29th, 1549. But this permission was based on a pragmatic calculation. The prince hoped their presence would attract Portuguese trade ships.
And an immediate and persistent difficulty arose: the language barrier.
A huge one. Xavier struggled profoundly with Japanese. He relied heavily on his companions, especially Juan Fernandez, who proved to be a highly proficient linguist and became the real linguistic engine of the mission.
But despite the initial permission, the results in Satsuma were very limited.
Only about 150 baptisms in a year. And crucially, most of those converts were from the lower social strata peasants, workmen people with less to lose.
And then even those meager results became irrelevant.
The connection between faith and commerce was abruptly severed. In the summer of 1550, the prince issued an edict making Christian conversion a capital offense.
A complete reversal. Why?
As purely pragmatic, he had been assured that having the missionaries there would attract foreign ships and their valuable cargo, especially guns and gunpowder.
But the ships didn't come to his port.
No, the Portuguese vessels went to the port of Hirado instead, in both 1549 and 1550. So the prince concluded that his hospitality had been profitless.
It yielded no commercial or military advantage.
And this incident reveals a crucial dynamic. Japanese rulers were eager for ships bringing guns and gunpowder, but largely indifferent to crosses and missiles, unless the priests offered a clear practical benefit.
And this was confirmed almost immediately when Xavier left Satsuma for Hirado.
The contrast was stark. In Hirado Harbor, the Portuguese merchant ships honored Xavier and his companions with artillery salvos, a huge public display of respect.
And the local princelet, Matsura Takanobu, was watching.
He was very keen-witted. He immediately saw the connection between the missionaries' presence and the respect paid to them by the wealthy traders. He saw the economic potential.
So he promptly ordered his subjects to listen to the missionaries respectfully.
Essentially directing them to patronize the new faith for commercial reasons. And the result was instantaneous. Over 100 converts in just 10 days.
But Xavier understood that this kind of local patronage was unstable. He needed protection from a higher authority.
The highest central authority. So he resolves to go to the capital, Kyoto, to seek protection from the emperor or the shogun.
A journey that proved to be incredibly arduous.
Notoriously so. It revealed the sheer poverty and chaos of the countryside. Xavier, a papal nuncio, was forced to hire himself out as a baggage bearer, was denied entry to inns, pelted with stones by children in Sakai.
And when he finally reached Kyoto in January 1551, the city itself was a disaster.
It was in a state of utter anarchy. Reduced by war and fire, court nobles had fled, the shogun had been hunted from the city. It was chaos.
And under these conditions, he could make no headway.
None at all. His poverty made him contemptible. He was denied an audience with both the emperor and the shogun. When he tried street preaching, nobody listened.
He realized the shogun had no real power.
Exactly. A minor princelet like Takanobu of Hirado had more genuine political authority at that moment. So after just 2 weeks, bitterly disappointed, Xavier left.
And this failure in Kyoto prompted a fundamental change in his strategy.
A very pragmatic, self-aware change. Returning to Yamaguchi, He abandoned what he called primitive simplicity. He realized that approach, prizing humble poverty, had completely failed to impress the status-conscious Japanese.
The success in Hirado had taught him that the Japanese perceived the priest's spiritual authority through the lens of the material respect shown to them by the traders.
Apostolic simplicity was just seen as poverty and irrelevance. So he made a strategic decision. He went back to Hirado to get better clothes and foreign novelties.
Things like a clock and a harpsichord.
Yes. And he returned to Yamaguchi and presented these items as official gifts from the Viceroy of India, producing letters of credence to support this new, elevated diplomatic status.
And the daimyo of Yamaguchi, Uche, was impressed.
Ochi was eager to encourage overseas trade. He saw the high regard the Portuguese traders held for these missionaries, now presented as envoys, and he saw an opportunity to attract commerce to his own ports.
So he granted Xavier permission to preach and gave them an empty Buddhist monastery as a residence.
And this change in strategy worked. He recorded 500 converts in Yamaguchi, including some samurai, the most valuable converts he made in terms of social standing.
A success that was also aided by Juan Fernandez's growing fluency in Japanese.
Yes, Fernandez could now engage in detailed doctrinal discussions with the Buddhist priests, the bonzes. One key convert from this period was Lawrence, a young man who joined the Jesuits and became a very successful missionary himself.
But even with this localized success, which was entirely dependent on political patronage, they faced huge theological and cultural obstacles.
Enormous ones. One of the most profound shocks to the Japanese mindset was the Christian doctrine about the fate of their ancestors.
The idea that non-worshippers, including all previous generations of Japanese, would burn in hell eternally.
For a society built on ancestor veneration, this was morally repugnant. They would ask Xavier, if your God is good, why didn't he send his message sooner so my father could have been saved?
A direct challenge to the religion's moral legitimacy.
And the missionaries' counter-argument was, well, it was pragmatic to the point of being cynical. They argued that the terror of their ancestors' fate would encourage the living to labor all the more on behalf of their own safety.
Using ancestral love as a tool for conversion.
It rarely satisfied the philosophical objection. Another major impediment was the intellectual authority of China.
The Japanese educated classes deferred to the Chinese as being first in wisdom and knowledge in all things.
And the critical problem was that there is no personal creator or creation story in established Chinese philosophy. So the Japanese scholars reasoned, if a first cause really existed, the Chinese would have known about it.
And since the Chinese didn't acknowledge one, it must not be true.
A powerful intellectual roadblock, which is interestingly why Xavier's credibility often came not from theology, but from his superior scientific knowledge.
He could explain things like comets and thunderbolts, and claimed he could prove the world was round.
Now, his science was the Ptolemaic geocentric view, which was already outdated in Europe because of Copernicus, but it was still vastly superior to the Japanese cosmological system.
And many reason that a scholar with such high scientific attainment probably wouldn't be wrong about religion.
But the initial tolerance from the Buddhist priests, the bonzes, that quickly evaporated.
At first, they were welcoming, just seeing it as one more sect.
But then the missionaries proved to be fiercely exclusive, aggressive, and intolerant. Xavier, in particular, began openly assailing the morals and rituals of the Buddhist monks at Yamaguchi.
Creating local friction.
And this aggressive stance quickly led to domestic turmoil. The daimyo had to punish some of the new Christians for their disorderly conduct. That kind of social disorder, combined with the lack of economic benefit, is what led to the proscription of Christianity in Satsuma.
Then, in 1551, a revolution in Yamaguchi complicates things even further.
Uchi, the missionary's patron, is killed. Torres and Fernandez have to go into hiding, proving that their protection was temporary and dependent on the fortunes of a single warlord.
The new ruler, Uchi Yoshinaga, does eventually reestablish them in a monastery.
He does, but the title deed he gives them fundamentally misunderstands Christianity. It refers to it as developing the law of Buddha and calls the priests so, or monks.
Which was an easy mistake to make, given the ritual similarities. Incense, candles, rosaries, shaven heads.
This was hugely annoying for the missionaries. They had to spend a great deal of effort teaching the great difference between these two religions, aggressively claiming that Japanese law was based on fables and falsehoods.
Which only heightened the internal friction.
So by late 1551, Xavier realizes his time in Japan is drawing to a close.
He departed on November 20, 1551, after a stay of 27 months. He sailed from Bungo, escorted with considerable pomp by the Portuguese merchants.
And his host, the daimyo Otomo Yoshishige, then just 23, granted firm permission for the missionaries to continue their work. But his motives were entirely about attracting trade.
He even sent his own envoy with Xavier to the Viceroy of India and the King of Portugal to solidify those commercial ties.
Otomo was a shrewd politician. He was very interested in foreign firearms, but he didn't convert himself until 27 years later, which confirms his initial support was purely political.
Xavier also wanted to counter the Japanese belief in their own cultural superiority, so he tried to send representatives back to Europe.
Yes, but he couldn't persuade any scholars or high-ranking Japanese to go. They had little curiosity about what they considered an inferior world.
So he was accompanied by Otomo's envoy and two of his own Japanese servants.
One of whom, Bernard of Satsuma, successfully reached Lisbon and entered the Society of Jesus. The strategic purpose was for him to see the resources of the Christians and report back.
So the final count of converts after 2 years was relatively low.
About 600 to 700 people total, the most valuable group being the 500 better-educated converts in Yamaguchi, who came about largely due to that specific material patronage of the daimyo.
And this modest result, combined with the intellectual challenge from Chinese philosophy, led Xavier to his next strategic goal.
He reasoned that if China, the intellectual fountainhead of the region, adopted Christianity, the Japanese would inevitably follow.
And that's what motivated his departure. She left Japan for India in early 1552 and then set out for his mission to China.
A mission that was ultimately unsuccessful. He died on the island of Changshuang near Canton on December 2, 1552.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed learning something new. That's all for now, but in case you didn't notice, there are a lot more episodes on this subject available on this channel. If you're enjoying these historical podcasts, please like and subscribe and share with other history buffs.
Well, this is an AI recording. The research that has gone into this production is comprehensive and focuses on very specific moments in history, designed to bring as much detail to the listener as possible. Thanks again for listening in.